Hey, if you like what you see, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that noti bell because it really helps out. When Marvel Studios first announced Moon Knight, I didn't know what to expect, and honestly, I didn't know who to expect either. I'd never read the comics, I didn't grow up with the character. To me, Moon Knight was just a cool looking figure I might have seen pop up in fan casts or random Marvel tier lists. But as someone who has steadily been losing steam with the MCU post-Endgame, I decided to give this show a chance, and what I got completely caught me off guard. From the very first episode, Moon Knight felt different. Not different in that new costume, new setting, same formula kind of way that so many Marvel shows seem to repeat now and again, but genuinely different. Tonally, visually, emotionally. This wasn't about saving the multiverse or setting up the next Avengers crossover. This was about one man shuttered in every sense of the word, navigating the cracks in his identity under the gaze of ancient gods and cosmic forces far beyond his own control. What followed was a season of bold storytelling rooted in mental illness, spiritual trauma, Egyptian mythology, and some of the most captivating acting performances I've ever seen in the MCU to date. Oscar Isaac didn't just act, he transformed, flipping effortlessly between the soft anxious charm of Stephen Grant and the hardened, tormented Mark Spector. And with each switch, the story deepened. The more time I spent watching, the more I realized this wasn't just another entry in Marvel's ever-expanding catalog. This was something Marvel rarely lets itself be: introspective. It wasn't just about building towards a team-up, it was more about understanding the cost of surviving, about identity, grief, guilt, and the chaos that lives within us, where by the end of its run, I was fully convinced Moon Knight isn't just one of the best Marvel shows on Disney+, it's the second best overall, right behind Loki, and even that ranking feels closer to a tie than a clear hierarchy. So in this video, I want to talk about why this show hit so hard for someone like me, someone who didn't know a damn thing about Moon Knight going in, but walked away genuinely moved, entertained, and kind of annoyed and angry that it's not being talked about more. From its unique use of Egyptian mythology to its fearless approach to mental health and identity, Moon Knight stands out in the sea of content, and in a moment where superhero fatigue feels more real than ever, this show reminded me why I fell in love with these stories in the first place. There's something quietly genius about the way Moon Knight opens, and by that I don't mean flashy action or instant spectacle, I mean the choice to throw us directly into Stephen Grant's confusion. We don't meet the hero first, we meet the fracture, and that's what makes the pilot episode hit so hard. We're not given exposition dumps or told who Stephen is in some cheesy narration, we're shown a life of isolation, disorientation, and emotional exhaustion. From the sand around his bed to the taped up door, we get the uneasy feeling that Stephen's life isn't just strange, it's unsafe, not from an outside threat, but from within himself. And we feel it, the disconnection, the sleep-deprived fear, the awkwardness of his voice, the way he clings to every little routine just to stay grounded. It's one of the most vulnerable and honest intros to a Marvel character we've ever gotten, and it works, because it doesn't feel like it's trying to be cool, it's trying to be something else entirely, and that something is real. And then, just when we start to settle into Stephen's awkward rhythm, the museum, the goldfish, the mum on the phone, everything snaps. The scene cuts, he's waking up in places he doesn't remember being, there's a car chase he doesn't remember starting, there are voices in his head that knows more than he does. The episode weaponizes disorientation. It wants us to feel like we're slipping through the cracks just as much as Stephen is, and it's all done without over-explaining anything. The brilliance of it is in the restraint. We aren't told who Mark Spector is yet, we don't understand Khonshu or what serving the gods even means, all we know is that something is wrong, and whatever it is, it's been taking control of Stephen's life. That moment in the Alps, when he blacks out and suddenly people are on the floor injured or dead and he's just standing there covered in blood, that's when I knew this show was going to be different, that it was going to respect our intelligence, that it wasn't afraid to lean into suspense, mystery, and even a different kind of horror. But the best part of this first episode is how personal it feels. It isn't just weird for the sake of being weird, it's weird because Stephen is scared, because the unknown parts of himself, the blackout episodes, the missing time, the mysterious reflections are deeply unsettling. Not just in a there's something wrong with me kind of way, but in a there's someone else inside me way. And the show itself treats that with a surprising amount of care. It builds trust with the viewer by not rushing to solve the mystery, instead it lets us sit in the discomfort. And that's what makes the final scene, when Mark finally speaks directly directly to Steven through the mirror feels so earned. That reflection scene, with the bathroom lights flickering and the thudding footsteps of the Moon Knight suit approaching, it doesn't just end the episode, it cements the entire tone of the series going forward. This isn't a story about a hero discovering his powers, it's a story about a man trying to survive himself, and from that point on, I was all in. One of the most unexpected joys of Moon Knight, and a huge personal highlight for me, was just how deeply it leaned into Egyptian mythology, especially the lesser-known gods and spiritual conceptions that rarely get time in the spotlight. Growing up, I was obsessed with ancient Egypt, thanks in large part to the original Yu-Gi-Oh series, which introduced me to the ideas of pharaohs, mystical relics, and godlike entities before I even understood the real history behind them. Over the years, that fascination never really faded, so when Moon Knight didn't just name drop Ra or Anubis, but instead introduced deities like Khonshu, Ammit, and Tawaret, gods that don't usually make pop culture rounds, I was fully sold. It felt like Marvel was finally digging deeper, not just scratching the surface of ancient Egyptian mythology, but showing the audience how rich and strange and morally complex these ancient belief systems really are. It wasn't Egypt for pure aesthetic flair, it was Egypt as foundation woven into the very heart of the story. What makes this even better is that the gods weren't portrayed as just background lore or static figures, they were active players, not all-powerful beings, but schemers, judges, manipulators, and even reluctant allies. Khonshu, for example, isn't your typical benevolent moon god, he's brutal, righteous, but manipulative, a divine being who uses broken humans as pawns in his personal crusade for vengeance. He doesn't feel like a reskinned Odin or Zeus, he feels like a god straight out of old Egyptian texts, petty, vengeful, and still weirdly bound by rules and rituals. And then there's Tawaret, who in any other show might have been a joke character, but here, she was both adorable and deeply respectful to the source material, a protective goddess of mothers and children, navigating the Duat, and guiding lost souls with both warmth and a touch of awkwardness. The fact that the show trusted viewers to get emotionally attached to a talking hippo goddess, that's wild, and it worked. But beyond just name recognition, what really struck me was how Moon Knight used these gods to explore larger themes. The whole conflict between Khonshu and Ammit wasn't just a fight between good and evil, it was a philosophical war over how justice should be applied. Punish those who've already done wrong versus those who will do wrong. That's heavy stuff, especially for Marvel. And it also echoes real-world debates about free will, accountability, and preemptive control. These gods weren't just dressing for epic action scenes, they were catalysts for moral dilemmas. Their presence elevated the show beyond superhero antics, it made the narrative feel timeless, like a modern-day myth playing out in real time. For someone like me, who always hoped ancient Egyptian stories could get more attention in big-budget media, Moon Knight wasn't just a Marvel series, it was a long-overdue gift. A beautiful, eerie, reverent love letter to an entire mythology that shaped my imagination from childhood onwards. It still blows my mind that Moon Knight, a show that was so emotionally layered, stylistically bold, didn't immediately get picked up for a second season. Like, what are we even doing here? This is a series that gave us something different. It had powerful themes, deep character exploration, mythological richness, and a lead actor giving the performance of his career. And yet, silence. Nothing but vague, maybe, possibly responses from Marvel's higher-ups. Meanwhile, other shows that didn't even try to reach the same level of depth or narrative ambition, got started up without hesitation. It makes you wonder what the actual metric for greenlighting projects at Marvel Studios is these days. Because if we're basing it on audience engagement, emotional payoff, or just plain interesting quality, Moon Knight deserves to be at the front of the line. Let's be honest here, some of the newer MCU shows feel like they exist just to tick boxes. Take She-Hulk, for example. It kind of had potential. The concept of exploring superhero lore from a comedic angle isn't inherently bad, but the way it was executed felt so smug, so referential, that it forgot to actually tell a meaningful, interesting, hilarious story. It was more interested in pointing at itself and saying, "Look how clever we are," than in building meaningful characters. And don't even get me started on Ironheart, a show that's just recently aired, but somehow got the go-ahead, while Moon Knight, which already proved it works, is just left hanging in the air. How does that make sense? Why is Marvel doubling down on content with lead characters that feel invincible, unrelatable, and honestly a little narcissistic, instead of investing in a story that resonated with real-world mental health struggles, identity trauma, and ancient spirituality? It's baffling. What's most frustrating is how Marvel seems to ignore the actual conversation fans are having. People are still talking about Moon Knight, about Oscar Isaac's performance, about the dual identities of Stephen and Mark, about the heartbreaking childhood reveal, about Layla becoming a literal Egyptian superhero. It mattered to people, but instead of building on that success and improving the story henceforth after the cliffhanger of a season ending, Marvel appears to treat it like a one-off detour, a limited series oddity. And yet the MCU is perfectly willing to sink time and resources into shows that actively alienate fans. Look, I'm not saying every Marvel project needs to be grim or serious, but Moon Knight struck a balance. It had humor, heart, horror, and mythology, and the fact that it did all of that without relying on cameos or multiverse bait, that's a miracle in the modern MCU landscape. So why is it being sidelined? Why are we pretending it didn't earn a future? It deserves more. Honestly, it deserves better. Let's be real for a second. Moon Knight wouldn't be Moon Knight without Oscar Isaac. The man didn't just show up and play a Marvel character, he became two completely different people and made it feel so effortless that you sometimes forgot it was even the same actor. There were moments, especially early on, when Stephen and Mark switch mid-scene and it's jarring in the best way. One minute you're looking at a timid, soft-spoken, awkward museum gift shop worker who's barely holding it together, and then a blink later, you're face to face with a cold, hardened mercenary with the emotional weight of a lifetime in his eyes. And it never feels gimmicky. Oscar doesn't rely on flashy effects or exaggerated voices to make the distinction. He uses body language, breathing, posture, and eyes. That scene in the storage unit when Mark tries to speak to Stephen through a mirrored wall, that's an actor doing some of the most complex emotional heavy lifting I've ever seen in the MCU post-Endgame. He was playing two people talking to each other, and you could feel both of them as real, separate souls. But what really elevates his performance is how deeply rooted it is in trauma and vulnerability. This isn't just a man with split personalities, it's someone who literally had to fracture himself to survive. And Oscar Isaac doesn't shy away from the messiness of that, he leans into it. When Stephen discovers Mark's past, the way he stumbles through disbelief, pain, and eventually acceptance is genuinely heartbreaking. You could see Stephen trying to hold on to his innocence even as Mark tried to shield him from the truth. He gave the audience permission to feel confused, to feel hurt, and to sit in emotional discomfort. It's the kind of performance that demands more than just praise, it deserves recognition across the board. And let's not forget how much range Oscar showed. He played Stephen, Mark, and even the brief glimpse of Jake Lockley, all within a single season. It wasn't just technical skill, it was commitment. He brought the same level of depth and nuance you'd expect from an Oscar-worthy indie drama to a genre series about gods and avatars. That kind of dedication is rare, and you could tell he cared about the character and the story being told. He didn't treat Moon Knight as just another paycheck or another notch in his blockbuster belt. It felt like he truly believed in it, and that belief translated directly to the screen, elevating every scene, every moment, and every emotional beat. The fact that Oscar Isaac didn't just star in this series, but also helped produce it, says a lot about how invested he was. And honestly, it's a major reason why Moon Knight stands head and shoulders above so many other MCU shows. Moon Knight is the kind of show that shouldn't have just been remembered, it should have been revered. It dared to go deeper than most MCU entries post-Endgame, not by being the flashiest or the most interconnected, but by telling a story rooted in identity, in pain, in the duality of human nature. It asked hard questions about what justice really means, how people survive unspeakable trauma, and what it looks like to live with a mind that doesn't always feel like your own. Moon Knight offered something rare in Marvel's Disney Plus catalog, substance. And that, at the center of it all, was Oscar Isaac, fully locked in, emotionally raw, giving the kind of performance that other actors in the MCU simply don't get the material to attempt, or even attempt in the first place. And yet, here we are. No season 2, no future announcements, no acknowledgement of the show's legacy or its fanbase. Meanwhile, the MCU pushes forward with projects that feel increasingly hollow, carried by characters who feel more like brands than actual people. We're getting more shows, more timelines, more multiversal noise, but fewer stories that mean something. Fans like me. People who grew up loving mythology, who connected with the themes of identity, who saw pieces of ourselves in Stephen and Mark, aren't asking for much. We're just asking for more. More time in this strange, fractured, shadowy world. More of Khonshu, more of the ancient gods, the psychological horror, and the emotional honesty that made this series so beloved by us in the first place. Moon Knight proved that Marvel could still be artful, introspective, and meaningful. And if they can't see why it deserves a future, then maybe they've lost sight of what made people fall in love with the MCU in the first place.